Hi, and welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today on the show, Jon sits down with Eva Kurilova, and they're going to discuss not only gender ideology here in Canada, but also its impacts on both women and children. Let's bring Jon and Eva right into the show right now. They've got a great talk ahead.
Brad, thank you as always, and it is our pleasure to have Eva with us. Eva, as I say with so many of our guests are a wealth of knowledge, and you're a subject matter expert in your own right. Eva, you write, you are a writer. Let people know at the outset, where can they read your writings, and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jon. And thank you so much for having me on. I'm a writer and a journalist, which is still weird to describe myself that way, but I guess it fits. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, and I write for three main outlets. I write for Gender Dissent, which is a Canadian website. It's all volunteer-based. All of the wonderful women that I work with there, we all just volunteer our time to do this. And it's kind of a follow the money type of site. We follow the money behind the gender push in Canada, whether that's in schools, in prisons, in healthcare settings. We do that kind of investigative work, and also just other columns and pieces. I also write for a Substack called The Distance. It's also a look at the gender wars from a very politically homeless, or I guess you could just say apolitical lens. We tackle a lot of different subjects. We don't have a right or left leaning or bias or anything like that. And I also write for Redux, which is a fantastic site. My friend Anna Slatz is the editor-in-chief. So Redux looks mostly at safeguarding for women and children, and mostly at the issues surrounding gender and self-ID, things like men and women's prisons, things like that. And I've had a couple of pieces also in Colin Wright's fantastic Substack, Reality's Last Stand. Very pleased to be associated with that. He does great work there. So that's where you can find my writing, and you can also find me on Twitter at Eva_Kurilova. I do a lot of tweets there. So that's my background.
As a matter of fact, that is how we became acquainted. Because I forget who commented on whose tweets first, but I thought, wow, this is a woman after my own heart, right? Going after really unmasking the trans movement, unmasking those really deviant men. There's no other way to put it. You can have some women in there like Dr. Gallagher, right? I don't know if she tweets, but this isn't to say it's only men that are the problem in this. But as far as sexual deviance, the predominance of the issue is men that are trying to get their hands on the body parts, that may go into private spaces. That's really what this is. When you have a man that's pushing it, really anybody, but especially the men, it always comes down to, in my estimation, then I'm going to get your opinion on this, that, as you said, follow the money. So inevitably, those that are the most aggressive, and we're not talking about the 80%, who are the ones that are being harmed by this stuff. We're talking about the 20%, that's a subjective assessment, but it's probably accurate. And then as far as those that are really aggressive, pushing this false narrative, that are really sucking in the 80%, these wounded kids that are very easily manipulated. So you have about 20% who are driving this thing, and then you have different, what I call the dark special interests, which was comprised of those 20%. So some of the most aggressive, understandably, you either follow the money or follow the deviance. And as you say, you have followed the money very well, but you are concerned, as I am. And so one of the things that you have been writing about, I've produced a couple of parts of a documentary, because I felt compelled. Because what we're all about ultimately, we're not anti anything except for things that would harm people. We are pro the protection of women and children. We take a high bar approach to protecting vulnerable people and those that are being manipulated. So all that to say, one of the issues that is not getting enough airplay, that is not coming to the public's attention, and hopefully now we can be an additional voice right now. Redux has been doing a great job. I highly recommend it. Right? I get a lot of my stories from Redux that get me all energized, and I post about it, is the harm that women in prison are being subjected to, and I will reemphasize that. It is the harm that these women are being subjected to. So you have women that are being put in prison, they're finding themselves in prison. Women in prison tend to be in one of two populations, by the way. Men run the gamut in terms of their crimes. Women will tend to be either having been used and therefore they were driving the vehicle in the drug bust, and so they get charges as well. So they're usually an accomplice, but they're trying to be nice to the perpetrator in some fashion, so they get charged. Or really heinous individual, as far as women, a lot of times they're mad as hell and they can't take it anymore, so they start stabbing men and things like that. So you'll tend to find those two extreme populations in women's prisons.
Yeah.
So what happens? Literally now, there's this big push within the trans movement to put men, sexually deviant men, who are a danger to women, to put them into women's prisons. So it's allowing the wolf, we're not even going to say the fox, allowing the wolf into the hen house. And these women now are captive audience, and these men are actually being put into the cells. These become the cellies. Can you imagine? You're a woman, you more than likely, about 80 to 90%, I'm going to say almost all of them, any woman that's in a prison, you're going to find that there's been molestation in her background, and income opens the door. I worked in a prison for 11 years. The door opens, and here's your new cellie, is man, an intact man, smiling at you. And you can't protest if you're an inmate.
No.
And now the door shuts, and you're in there 24/7, pretty much, with a guy. And so these women are being raped. These women are being traumatized at the very least. And more stories are coming out about women being impregnated. And since
yes,
there is no consensual sex in prison, it's all goes against the rules and it's illegal. It's considered rape. So, Eva, you have begun passionately trying to blow the whistle on this ruse. I've done the same. So talk to us about your concerns. Talk to us about what's happening in Canada. Speak on behalf of these women, because the public needs to understand that these are fellow citizens in each of our countries. These are women. These are sisters. These are mothers that are being traumatized. It's bad enough to go to prison. You're already going to be traumatized. They're paying for their crimes. Now to think that they're going to be raped and traumatized and then come out and try to be normal.
Yeah, so this is probably currently my main concern, because it's just so atrocious. You know, in my estimation, this is a human rights violation. This is a human rights abuse for those women. You know, I'm working on an article right now that kind of is trying to, this is obvious to us. This is obvious to anybody with a brain that they are violating their human rights. But I'm kind of going to go step by step through, like, specifically in Canada, because that's where I'm based. You know, to establish that the Canadian government made women's prisons for females, knowingly made them for the female sex, and now they're just sticking men in there. And what gets me is most people don't know about this. A lot of people truly don't know this is going on, even though it started in Canada, in the provinces, I think as early as 2015. So our provincial prisons, they were starting in Toronto and British Columbia. They were putting in rules because as they were changing their human rights codes to include gender identity and gender expression, they were starting to transfer these men. And then, of course, in 2017, with the notorious Bill C-16, which also added gender identity and expression to the Canadian Human Rights Code. So that went on to affect federal prisons. Because most people, I think, are unaware that the Canadian Human Rights Code, it doesn't apply to too many areas of our lives, because that's more on the provincial side. But when it comes to federal prisons, that applies. And so that's the rationale by which they are making these transfers. And, you know, most people don't know. But what always consistently shocks me is when people do hear about this, sometimes they're just so callous. You know, they're just like, well, these women are in prison anyway, or they have this attitude that all these women are just violent and they're going to take care of it. And like you said, women in prison are very vulnerable. They're generally not in there for violent crimes. They're not going to just dish out prison justice. You know, people have this kind of fantasy that they'll take care of these men. That is not true. They're traumatized. A lot of them have sexual abuse in their histories. You know, they're not happy to be with these men by any stretch of the imagination. And I've done a lot of writing on this issue. There's a lot of stats that we have now from governments around the world. You know, the men that are being transferred into women's prisons, these aren't just your typical male offenders. That would be bad enough. They actually, you know, have an overrepresentation of sexual violence. About half of them are usually in for sexual offenses. You know, and that of course doesn't mean only half of them are sex offenders. Probably most of them are, you know, previously not caught or whatever. They are also disproportionately in there for violent crimes, more likely to have caused serious injury, psychological harm, or death. These are all stats from recently released reports from Canada from 2022. They were following about 99 gender diverse offenders, and they found these things. So what's happening is just unconscionable. I don't know how you can hear about this and not realize that there's something very wrong here. You know, the first time I heard about this, I can't quite remember, but my good friend Heather Mason, she's the one here in Canada who brought this issue to a lot of women's attention so that we could start talking about it and protesting about it. She is a former federal inmate, and she was in prison when these transfers started happening. And when she got out, she didn't really want anything to do with activism. Women were kind of contacting her saying, hey, do you know about this? But over time, she still had friends on the inside, and they were telling her, hey, these men are getting transferred in here. This is horrible. You know, she couldn't help it. She was trying to get back on her feet after having been in prison, wanted to get her life back. She's done a fantastic job. She's a wonderful person, but she had to do this activism. So she started putting on protests across the country. I've taken part in a few. About a year ago, we had a first one here in Calgary. We don't have a prison here in Calgary, so we decided to just walk around the streets holding signs, handing out flyers, letting people know. And I thought that was quite effective because we handed out 100 flyers that day, you know, and most people had no idea. When we went to them and said, do you know they're housing male rapists in women's prisons? They looked at us like we were crazy, you know. And then in October of 2022, I also flew to Toronto to take part in a much bigger protest. We thought it would be better if we all group up together. Because Canada, the geography is kind of a challenge to everybody to meet up, and so that's hard. So we do have quite a few. We have some passion here. We have a lot of women and a lot of men too who really, really want to do it. But you know, we're 6 of us in Calgary. We're 10 of us in Toronto, so it's quite hard. So I knew I had to fly out, and that was fantastic. And then just a week or so ago, I also, with some great women here in Calgary, we were holding a banner from an overpass. It said, no males in women's jails. So the goal was to pick a busy road and to just hold it there and just make people think, right? At least they might go home and Google. At least they might be like, what's going on? What are these people talking about? And so that's actually been a Canada-wide initiative. Women in Toronto and Ottawa have done the same thing. They've made fantastic banners and they've hung it for people to see. So we're really just trying to raise awareness, because when people do realize what's going on, you know, as long as they're not totally heartless, they don't agree with this. And it's just tragic because it's been happening 6 years now in the federal jails. And these women, you know, nobody listens. Like I think what really grabbed me was a friend of Heather's had written a grievance to Correctional Service Canada because there was a pedophile by the name of Matthew Harks. They had put him into a women's prison. He actually reportedly has had the surgery, you know, so I hate when people make the excuse of, oh, it's okay when they have the surgery, it's fine. So he was put in the women's prison, and you know, he's a serial pedophile, and he chose the youngest looking woman to target and to harass and to assault. And this poor woman, she wrote a grievance to the service. She said, look, this is what's been happening to me. I'm struggling with PTSD. I can't handle this. And the letter they sent in response was basically just, it didn't address any of her concerns. They basically just explained to her what gender identity was. They explained to her that because of Bill C-16, this is why they have to house these prisoners there. And just the extreme callousness of it, the total oversight, the valuing of the feelings of these pedophiles, of these rapists and murderers over the actual physical safety of these women, it just really got to me. Like, you know, that became a huge issue for me after reading that.
But let me add a little bit to this, because I, like you, right, the average person is working, doing their life, and so we hear about inmates, people hear about people that go to prison and say, well, do the crime, do the time, and I don't have to worry about it. Working in a prison was not in my long-term plan, but there I was, and so started the nation's first intensive treatment program, long-term solitary, and through all that. But then also worked, oversaw the treatment of one of the states in Pennsylvania, one of the states, high-intensity, standalone 65-bed unit treatment programs, specialized treatment programs for sexually violent predators. I have thousands of hours working with these guys. And until you start to read the files or the police reports, you don't have a sense of, I had worked with survivors, but you don't really have a sense of how heinous and how calculating these men are. So I'm working in a prison. I start to see the reality of how a guy becomes sexually deviant and the harm that these guys have done. We ended up being asked to help SCI Muncie. Pennsylvania has 2 female prisons. They have 27. They may have downsized to 25, but think about the numbers. This is important. I mentioned this in a YouTube podcast that I have done. And it's called At Risk, the Dangers of Putting Men in Women's Prisons. There are 25 prisons, I think, now in the state of Pennsylvania in the US. Two of those 25 are female. So you already have a sense of how many men versus women commit crimes, and you were exactly correct that the average woman that is in prison, she's in for very minor offenses in this sense. The majority of the women in prison have been sexually abused, and they were sexually abused prior to prison. So you have a young girl comes up to her home, she's molested, she's abused, she has mental health issues now. She's struggling, so she'll start to try to self-medicate through drugs or alcohol. She's ripe for being used, for being manipulated into prostitution. She also is typically what we might call codependent, or she's an enabler, she's a rescuer, she's a pleaser. Why? Because she's been scripted into that. So the guy that she's with, maybe she's believed the lie of 50 Shades of Grey, that somehow I can help heal this man. She's attracted to the bad boy, right? Right? Okay, so she's driving the car. He's going to do the drug deal. Well, the police bust them both. Guess where she's going? Or she's being pimped out. There's a wide range of things, but she's already emotionally damaged. And now she's sent upstate or up province. I don't know what they say in Canada. Okay, so this is a very typical thing. Or domestic violence. She tried to protect herself. Mm-hmm. So the majority of women, I want people to grasp this, and I'm going to have you pick up from there. I want to set the stage. I want to bring the pathos, because you're being great, but I'm getting energized. So I want people to feel this, that we're talking about somebody's daughter. I have a daughter, somebody's sister, who stuff happens to this young woman, and she gets messed up in things and mixed up in things. And before you know it, you're the dad, you're the parent, you're the brother, or you're the sibling. You find out that your family member, she's gone to prison. She's being sentenced. Okay, she's not a bad person. The jerk that she was with is the bad guy, but she was, I'm going to use the term, this is not pejorative, she was the useful idiot. She's just trying to be nice. She's trying to make him happy. Okay, this is the kind of woman that's going to now go to prison.
Yeah.
Okay, agreeable, not violent. There are some violent women.
There are, of course.
But the vast majority are this kind. So now they're in there and they just want to get along, and they're trying to figure out how to dig themselves out of this hole. Some of them have kids.
Yes.
Right. And so they're trying to maintain, they're trying to get their lives together. A lot of them are into drugs and alcohol because they've been self-medicating. They are ripe for exactly what happened prior to prison. They were ripe for being manipulated. They have a hard time with boundaries, with asserting themselves. That's how they got connected with these idiots, the guys who used them. So you have very susceptible women who are manipulated. Now they're arrested. These are daughters. These are sisters. So they're in prison. That's bad enough. They're away from their kids. So they're trying to rethink their life. They're trying to figure out how to become a more assertive person, but in their core, they're not being helped with any trauma. Trust me, prison does not help psychologically. They have groups, but it doesn't, So they're just trying to recover. They're trying to figure out, what do I do? And now they've added guilt on top of shame, or shame on top, right? And then all of a sudden the door opens. Track with me. You're in a cell. You can't leave. You're doing 2 to 5 years for a drug bust. And in comes this 6'1", very large man who's dressed in drag.
Yep.
Who darkens the door. Door opens. Here he comes. He's got a box of stuff, and the door shuts behind him. Where is she? She is right back where she was, but now nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And this is a deviant man. And I can assure everyone listening, and any politician, whether state or federal, provincial or federal, anywhere around the world, and I've issued this challenge before, that at your expense, Mr. Politician, you allow me, you pay for my trip, because I'm going to tell you, you're putting, any policymaker, I can tell you 100%, you are putting women at risk, and you are complicit in their rape. 100%. Because the men that are requesting to go into women's prisons, they're requesting for a reason, and it's not for safe haven.
No.
So if you want to challenge me, anybody, come on my live program Friday nights, Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. We'll debate this. I was on psych staff for 11 years. I know exactly the kind of men, and I'm a sex offender treatment provider, been working with perps for years. I can guarantee that any man that is asking to transfer in, he has harmed women sexually already. Only 50% have been busted for it. 1 in 1,000 men, literally, 1 in 1,000 who perpetrated a criminal act against women sexually are convicted, or ever convicted. 1 in 1,000. So we're talking the kind of men that we're being told, these sensitive men. No, these sensitive men don't want to go to female prison. The flamboyant ones that are busted for drugs and alcohol, they love being in the male prisons. I had them on my caseload. Why? They got all this attention, and they get a single cell oftentimes.
Yeah. That's what Heather Mason said. They want to stay.
Okay, they want to stay in the male prison. So the ones that want to go to female prisons, they want to rape and molest women. That's the bottom line. You doubt that? Let me do a deep dive into all the records of your prison system, and I will show you 100% guaranteed the backgrounds of these guys that they've sexually assaulted but were never charged, or they did a plea deal away. So these are dangerous men that are being allowed into women's prisons, and these women are sitting ducks. Eva, talk to us about more of this danger to women.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, and another thing that's quite atrocious is we mentioned kind of how vulnerable they are. So in Canada, our government gives a lot of lip service to Indigenous women and girls, because in our country, they're just a very vulnerable population. There are a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues with abuse and on the reserve, and they make up, I think, roughly 40 to 50% of the federal prison population. In Alberta, where I am, they actually make up 60% of the provincial prison population. So these are the women that the government is giving so much lip service to, caring about and protecting and helping. And then what they do, of course, is overjail them and then put men in prisons with them. And you also mentioned how a lot of these women are mothers. So Canadian prisons, I'm not sure how it is in other places, but some of them have a mother-child program, where children up to a certain age, I can't remember the exact age, can actually live with their moms. It's kind of like, in the minimum security prisons, it's more like townhouse style housing. Like the women will kind of have their own houses. And in these prisons, they have one that has for mother-child, and then other women can apply to be kind of like aunties, and they can take care of them and stuff, right? So part of what's so horrible, that's what's going on, is 2 quite prominent pedophiles, Matthew Harks, who I mentioned, and Tara D'Souza. His name was Adam. I can't pronounce his last name. But 2 pedophiles. They were in the women's jail, And they were, seen hovering and lurking and skulking around the mother-child house. They would always be around. And these are, two men convicted of sexually harming young children. One was a baby. So then, of course, a woman who a guard had kind of warned, like, hey, watch out for this guy. She approached him. She said, hey, why are you lurking around the mother-child program? And she was attacked. Redux reported on this a couple of weeks ago. This man attacked her for facing up to him. So this is just, what's going on is just unconscionable. And, there was a recent transfer that Heather Mason reported on, another man who in 2009 was convicted of sexual assault on a child under 14. So I looked into this guy, I looked into his criminal history, I looked into 3 different court documents detailing all of his, his life. And it was just obvious, you always speak out about the escalation, that this escalates, and he started back in 1989. He started with Indecent Exposure. He did that a bunch of times. He, young women, teenage girls, he would just be on park benches exposing himself. So, lo and behold, a decade later, he was then charged with sexual assault until he was finally charged for this crime, for which he's been in prison ever since. And seems like 2 months ago, he was transferred to a women's prison. This man with a very long history of indecent exposure, sexual assault, clearly, hates women, has no respect for boundaries, has no control of himself, will sexually attack them. And I've heard that he has had the surgery. Again, not that it matters, because in Canada, it doesn't matter. It's based on self-ID, case-by-case basis. You don't need to have had the surgery. They will move you anyway. But so, yeah, that proves that getting the surgery doesn't make them any better, doesn't make them any less dangerous or less likely to be hurting these women. So,
matter of fact, I'll address that real fast in this sense. And I wouldn't have known it until working on psych staff in the prison and did a deep dive into their minds, so to speak. People need to understand this, that sexual deviance is different than lust. And as a matter of fact, there's a very dangerous assumption in the literature that the reason men offend is because they have so much testosterone. That is not the reason why, and that's why the static 99R, I have huge concerns about that. It is very inaccurate when it comes to assessing the risk of pedophiles. It's the most widely utilized risk assessment of sex offenders. It's accurate for all other populations except for pedophiles. The assumption is this, that as a man grows older and as his testosterone drops, he's less likely to offend. That couldn't be any more further from the truth. The reason a man offends, crosses sexual boundaries, is because of deviance. It's not because of lust, it's not because of testosterone, it's because of deviance. The definition of deviance is this, and I came up with the best definition, I believe. So here's the new definition, right? It is having traversed downward into various stages. It starts with attraction, moves into lust, then into power control. You're into objectification and fueled by pornography. So deviance, the process is deviance. It's fueled, supercharged by porn and the internet, meaning now it's super fast into this process. A man becomes twisted. He becomes a sexual psychopath. He's no longer normal. Everything's inverted. His brain is different. A normal man cannot get aroused unless his partner is enjoying herself. I'll just put it that way, right? We hear that, she ruined, the mood's not there, okay? When a man moves into deviance, it's nothing about mood, and it has nothing to do with attraction, has nothing to do with lust, it has nothing to do with even power and control. It's even worse. It has to do with leaving and inflicting a lifelong negative traumatic impact. You get off, for a guy who's deviant, he's getting off on knowing he's harming, leaving a lifetime negative impact upon his victim. That's what causes him to get an erection. These men are not normal. So that's why they want to go into women's prisons. And that's why you can whack off, pardon the pun there, you can hack off their, I can't believe I just said that. You can hack off their body parts. Okay, you can castrate them. That was a Freudian.
It was.
Okay, there.
Like, where's he going with that?
Yeah, where am I going with this now? Okay. Anyways, okay, almost in closing. You can cut off their testicles.
Yes.
Right? You can castrate them, chemically castrate them, and it won't make a difference. That's why these men will use objects to rape their victims. And I had pedophiles have this discussion with me in the sense that the idea of chemical castration, and to a normal person, it's like, oh my gosh. But the guys would say, no, you know what? If that were an option, we'd do that, Mr. Uhler. I said, why? Oh, so we can get out early. Okay, so they're not normal. The issue of deviance is about is about harming, traumatizing. They want to see trauma in the face of their victims. So you can castrate them. You can remove their male parts, but guess what? It's in the mind. These guys are predators and they're out to traumatize.
Exactly. Well said.
How am I going to get myself out of what I just said? Okay, well, that's a rough way to, you know what? Well, let's bring it to a close. I'm aware of the time.
Okay.
See if we can cover. Would you stay with us for part 2? We're going to pick it up at this point. And we'll add anything else that you want to add about deviant men dangerous men being sent into women's prisons. And then your other passion is protecting children from the pushers of the trans deception. So, Eva, would you be willing to stay right there and we will pick it up on part 2?
Of course. That sounds great.
Brad, thank you. And we will pick it up with Eva on the other side.
Well, thank you both for being here for this half hour. Jon and Eva will be back with part 2, obviously, as they discuss more on gender ideology here in Canada, as well as how it impacts women and our children. I'm Brad Wilder. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Our BitChute channel is up and underway as well. You can see us online at UnMaskingTheTransMovement.com. We'll see you next time.